This light is terrible. I had the larger light on before, and it was shocking as well. If I have this room's light on, we get terrible effects. What do we got? Ah, no, we can't have that. That's shocking. That'll burn out your socket. We'll leave that off. And I've got this lamp happening. I have to do this recording at night. It's the only time I can do it. Here we go. Oh, that looks a bit eerie. I promise I'm not actually trying to go for these weird ass kind of ambience. This is oh well, that's gonna have to do. Okay. Guys, I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a long time. Now every time I sort of get things in the groove and it looks like that I'm gonna have time to make some recordings and things like that, I get a few problems with hardware and software and things like that. The most recent were compatibility issues and things like that. Just recently, the most recent one was that I wanted to find a movie maker that I liked again, and I used to, years ago, use Movie Maker 2012. And I couldn't find it online. I ended up finding it on Internet Archive. So I put it on this machine, this laptop I've got here. But there was an incompatibility where the microphone wouldn't work for a bit, and that sucked. Ended up having to find under one of the little I don't actually know what the hell happened there. I suck with computers, but I ended up finding something that was telling me that the computer was trying to use the speakers as the microphone. So I put that right, and now we're off and we're rolling. But to the chase, my name is Riain O Muscrai, and I'm an Australian experiencer. I've had contact events all my life. Most notably in the last 10 years. But since I moved back to near the town, not actually in the town, but near the town that I grew up in, and I'd spent a while away. I spent a big portion of my adult life away in Melbourne at university and working, and then also up in the Dandenong Ranges in Victoria, the mountainous region just to the northeast of Melbourne, and then came back again to my old stomping ground, the Mornington Peninsula. And when I came back again at the age of 30, I'm 40 now. When I came back again to the age of 30, at the age of 30, I started having more intense experiences, especially at night, contact experiences, tall, which has always been the way of it, tall, skinny people with huge blue eyes, sometimes white hair, sometimes blondish, sometimes reddish, sometimes bald, and sometimes even in what I presume are wigs, because they don't really look natural on them. I have never actually had experiences, though, where I'm just there with them, completely compos mentis, completely awake and hanging out with them. My experiences are always, they call it mesmerization. They've actually said we apologize for the mesmerization and we apologize for the memory alterations. I'll give you an example. This was a major contact event. It was the second major contact event that I had when I moved back to the peninsula where I grew up. I went to bed and I woke up, or just suddenly found myself standing out on our veranda at night, lining up things on the table outside. We had bit of a porch happening and a table with benches and things like that, and there were old beer glasses and things like that, and a few, like, some change, loose change and things like that. And I found myself standing there in front of the table. I looked down at the things, I knelt down and started lining up, arranging the glasses, arranging the money, putting it in little piles, getting all that right, in this weird sort of trance-like state. And then I thought, oh, I better go back inside again. I got up and I started to wander off and wander towards the front door. Then I started levitating. Then I got pulled up and around the veranda, up over the top of the house, and then all of a sudden, boom, I was in a bed. And someone was a male, tall, huge eyes, hand in my mouth, going through and checking my teeth. Then I felt like I had my right leg crossed over my left leg. So I had my left leg was straight, my right leg was bent and crossed over. And I felt pressure down on the bed, and I looked over and there was a female, and she just projected feelings of like comfort and reassurance and things like that. I think maybe she even like touched me on the knee just for reassurance. I can't quite remember that, but there was certainly this projection of like a telepathic communication of reassurance. Then the guy moved around behind me, lifted up my head, and did an incredibly painful procedure up to where my spine goes into my skull and slightly to the left. It felt like just intense pain with this constant reassurance that everything was okay, and at no stage was I freaking out. So I was just relaxed about this. It was all for the best and for the greater good, and all fine, and not to move, and everything's well. This is the general vibe and feeling I was getting from it. And then then there was no one there anymore. And then there was a scan of my entire body that had a slight sound to it and went down my body, and then I think it went back up again. I'm not sure. And then as soon as it had finished, boom, I was awake in bed in the same position that I'd been in the event. And I got up, and I thought that was very strange. I went to the bathroom, and I had a feeling as though there was a presence still in the house, as though they were watching me to see how I reacted to this. And since I know that when they do these kinds of things, they are sensing to see how people deal with it, as to whether they have to take the memory away or not. And I must have reacted in a calm enough and accepting enough way that they didn't feel as though they had to. So I could feel, I didn't see anyone or anything in the house. I got up, went to the toilet, came back, went back to bed, and then I had a strange dream where I was outside the house and everything was like a bright red color. And I'm used to lucid dreams. I'm used to feeling what it's like to be awake and what it's like to be dreaming. And I'm fairly good at lucid dreaming. And my brother taught me when I was quite young how to lucid dream. My older brother is quite a bit older than me. So when I was about 10, he was 22, and he was very much into this kind of dream control techniques. And he taught me about lucid dreaming, looking at your hand, getting used to looking at your hand when you're awake and then also when you're asleep, and taking control of your dreams. If you look at your hand enough, you'll end up doing it like when you're awake. You'll end up doing it also, find yourself doing it when you're asleep, and you can see all the lines and things on your hands. You can start to take control from that point. I used to do that a lot of lucid dreamings. Nowadays, still have a lot of lucid dreams, but I don't really think about trying to have them anymore. I just have them. This experience I had, or lots of experiences since as well, not the same as dreams. They feel different. I feel different in my chest. I know when I'm dreaming, I can feel it, and can take over dreams. These are different. So when I came back from the bathroom, I went back to bed again. I lay down, I fell asleep, and I had this dream that I was outside in our garden where we lived at the time. Very red sky, and what I do often when I'm having lucid dreams is I scream into the dreamscape, and I just do this. I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm trying to achieve with it, but sometimes I just think I'm trying to make contact with anyone or something that's sharing a dreamscape with me, just in case there is. Just in case it's not just me in my own mind. We're sharing some kind of consciousness or something when you're dreaming. Who knows? So I screamed, trying to attract attention myself in the dreamscape, and then I was pulled back into wakefulness, into consciousness, and a voice right in the center of my head said, "You are okay." And I responded, "Oh yes," and I knew they were referring to the event that had just happened. And I was like, "No, that's okay. I'm fine with that kind of stuff. I presumed, this kind of stuff's real. I suspected in the past that this is what's going on, but this was the most extreme thing I've ever had happen to me so far." And I was like, "But I'm cool with this. No worries, guys." And then flashes of images came across my eyes. I'm not quite sure if they were just trying to calm me or if they were actually showing me some old images from where they're from or what. Images of wilderness, trees, mountains, and in particular, the last image I remember very well was some foliage down low, like low trees, and then up above it, a very high tree with branching foliage reaching out and some kind of habitation down behind in the background. And then that was gone. I was awake again. So yeah, that's what I had happen. That was about, when would that have been? That could have been 2010 or it could have been 2011. That experience, and I'd had one that was interesting a few nights before as well, but I won't bother getting into that one now. That involved levitation and things like that. Coming back through my own door and opening the door at night and putting my keys back on the wall and then levitating back into bed and things like that. I thought that's interesting for me to, in the old-fashioned way, actually come home through the front door. So all my life I've been, as a sort of a background interest, I've been interested in the paranormal, but not as a sort of an intense interest. I've had lots of different intense interests. I've had intense interests in birds of prey, First World War fighter planes, then Second World War fighter planes in a sort of really nerdy, autistic kind of way, just focusing the shit out of that. And dinosaurs at one stage when I was really little. Linguistics, especially Gaelic languages, Celtic languages, and especially Gaelic languages now. I've been learning Irish and Scottish Gaelic and Manx for the past 21 years. So I started when I was 19. I'm 40 now. I'm fully fluent in Scottish Gaelic. I can speak Irish. I can understand it very well. I can read and write in it, but I wouldn't say that I could speak it fluently. But I'm fully fluent in Scottish Gaelic. I only speak Gaelic at home to my kids. I have 3 kids. 13-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. No English to them at home. I only speak Gaelic to my wife. She's not a native Gaelic speaker. She's an Australian. Excuse me, Gamalishka, like me. But I speak that to her and have been doing that for many, many years since our first kid was born. And she's totally fluent passively. She understands it. And she's can speak it back if she really needs to, but for the most part, she chooses not to, much to my chagrin. So these beings that so that was a major contact event. Since then, I've had lots of contact events. I have telepathic contacts daily, hourly. It's not. I've looked a lot into this. It's not like auditory hallucinations like schizophrenia, where schizophrenics, it's usual for them to have what's called auditory hallucinations, and they actually, it sounds to them like using their ears, they are hearing people outside of themselves. It doesn't sound like there's voices in their head, which is the cliche. Schizophrenic, you got voices in your head. Even though the voices may be in their head, they are. It seems to them like they're actually hearing them. They're coming to them as any other sounds, auditory information. When I receive telepathic messages, I receive them as a soundless voice in my mind, like the kind of voice you have when you're reading quietly to yourself. Say, if you're reading a novel and you can hear your own reading voice in your head, it's like that, but not you. Sometimes sounding obviously feminine, sometimes more obviously masculine, sometimes neither, just a neutral kind of sound. Relevant to what I'm thinking at the time, conversing with me, asking me what I think about this, sometimes telling me off, telling me where I'm going wrong, saying I'm not thinking in the right way about certain philosophical ideas, historical notions I have, etc., and so on. And they are Orions. They are future humans. They are what are generally known as tall whites, after Charles Hall's stories. He did meet them. They do have a habitation there. They have habitations all over the world, underground subterranean facilities and habitations. They're permanently here. They've been here for thousands and thousands of years. They are future humans, but it's more complicated than that because they've gone back into our ancient past. They've interbred with us. One of the main reasons that they came back was because they have faulty genomes. They've been doing artificial manipulation of their own genomes for so long, for tens and tens of thousands of years, that they're in a bad way. They wanted to come back to the source. They wanted to come back to themselves as they were in ancient times before they left their home planet, which is this planet. This is where we're from. We haven't been seeded here. Humans evolved here. Although in this timeline we have a tricky situation where we're being influenced by them again. And I say that, I'm just putting emphasis on that because it's a common motif these days in the UFO world, that we're not from here, aliens have seeded us here, we've been created by aliens and things like that. No, the ETs that we're in contact with, they are extraterrestrials in the sense that they've left the Earth. They're from our future, which is a different timeline now, but I won't bother getting into that at the moment, because they're not going to evolve along this timeline again because they've messed with it so much. It's different now. We'll evolve another way now. They have come back to, well, one of the many reasons is to enrich their own DNA, their own genomes again, to go back to the source. They couldn't recreate it. It's like someone having too much plastic surgery on their face. You know, you've only got so much to work with. You keep fucking with it. You want the nose bigger and smaller again, and then make it bigger again. Go back to the source. Go way, way, way back. They have gone back to before humans, they themselves started messing with their own genomes. So we're like free-range humans that haven't left the Earth yet and haven't started manipulating our own DNA yet. They've gone back, way back into ancient times, and they've interacted with us. They've given rise to a lot of the superstitions, a lot of our religious thought, if not all of it, I suspect. And spirituality is based on ancient interactions with them and trying to justify it and rationalize it to ourselves. They are the gods, they are angels, they are demons, they are fairies, elves, they are the Stillfolk, they are trolls, they are gnomes, they are everything you can possibly think of. Nashichen, Naturhadjedanan, the Gaelic she and the Gaelic gods, for sure. They actually have Gaelic DNA. Now this is, I'm not quite sure how this works, whether people from ancient Ireland and Scotland have the DNA they have because there's been interbreeding with tall whites or Orions and it's left it in us, or whether they have signatures in them because they've interbred with us. But they do. I think it's probably the latter. I don't think we have been left with much interbreeding and signature on us, which is the whole point of us. We're free range. They don't want to mess with us too much in that sense, in that sort of genetic sense. They want to be able to take our DNA as a natural source and mix it back in with their own to strengthen themselves, but enrich themselves again. But yeah, so it's the latter, I think. I think that probably they have a bit of Gaelic, what we now think of as Gaelic DNA. And if you read the book by Bill Chalker, Australian researcher Bill Chalker, about Peter Curie's case, Australian experiencer, a tall female with huge blue eyes, white hair, left a head hair, and they did genetic testing on it. The root has Gaelic, Basque, and Basque DNA. Now, the Basques are interesting in themselves because linguistically speaking, their language is not related to any other language in Europe. It's not an Indo-European language. It's not even related to Finnish or anything like that. The Finnish is not an Indo-European language either. But there's some genetic similarities between Basque DNA and Irish or Gaelic DNA, especially in the far west of Ireland. So the similarity, which came first, chicken and the egg, I think probably theirs come from Gaelic people into themselves, but I'm not quite sure. But the most interesting thing about the Gaelic, that hair that had this DNA, on the shaft, by the way, was different DNA entirely. Mongoloid Asian DNA. They could see that it had been grafted, or it seemed to have been grafted, as though the DNA in the root didn't match at all, the DNA in the shaft like it was some kind of hair extension, a sophisticated one. But they're humans, anyway. And if you look at Dan Burish, it's a dirty name in ufology these days. No one likes the Burish. Very few people, anyway. He was telling the truth. This guy's telling the truth. The Orions I've asked them, what about this dude? You know, he seems to be talking about you. What about when he talks about the Orions and he says that the Orions, he doesn't talk about Orions much. He had more contact with J-Rods, with a different kind of future lineage human. But when I was watching a Dan Burish video for the first time, I think off Project Camelot, and that would have been in like the year when would that have been? I'm not a diary keeper, so I have to always go back to my noggin and say, this roughly happened then, that. I fucking hate diaries. They're probably fairly helpful, though, in these kind of situations. Probably about 2012, 2013, I reckon, that I first found out about Dan Burrish. And was interested. I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's talking about, alien beings as being future humans, and they've said to me themselves that they're versions of us. And when I'd asked them whether they're from our past, they were saying, oh, it's more complicated than that. And then and then they led me on and told me more stuff, and ended up saying to me, yeah, okay, we're basically future versions of yourself that have gone back into the past and have this sort of interactive, dynamic, genetic relationship with us. Watching him, and I was going, oh yeah, this is interesting, because he's talking about, J-rods that he was saying in ufology are sort of like what people would call greys. They're from the future, and I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, I think he's on the right track. And then he said, oh, and the Orions are the Tolls or Nordics, and they have huge blue eyes, and he said they look like Bratz dolls. Their eyes are too big for their heads. I was like, ba-ba! This dude knows what he's talking about. He's spot on. So they told me they were from the saucepan when I was young. The saucepan is what we call Orion in Australia, in the southern hemisphere. We call it the saucepan. We don't say Orion because it kind of looks like a saucepan. And Orion's belt is like the bottom of the saucepan. Anyway, they're from Orion's belt. They're from Alnilam, the middle star of Orion's belt, or I think they have a planet orbiting that, but there's also other stuff going on further on, another 10 or so light years. I'm not quite sure about that, though. Not 100%. They call their star, their main star, and I think it's Alnilam, but it may be another one. They call it the good star. MaJeena, they said to me. And they speak Gaelic. They speak lots of different Earth languages, but they remember how to speak Gaelic, which is not their native language. Not when I say native, not their original language, but a lot of them are native speakers of Gaelic still, because a lot of them are very old. Even though Gaelic's a dying language, these guys, a lot of them are as old as 600-700 years, and they've had a lot to do with Northern Europe, and Ireland and Scotland in particular, over the years. They call me the little Irishman because I speak Gaelic to my kids. But MaJeena they said MaJeena, and oh no, sorry. They said Maringa is the name of their star. MaJeena, they said, is their name. So my apologies. Maringa, they're saying, is the name of their star. That is relatable, I think, when I was sort of thinking about it later on, is like Rinak, which is a Gaelic word for star, and Va or Ma is good. But they've got the adjective at the front, which is not usual in Gaelic. And MaJeena is like Dernya Ma, good people, the good people. And they said that that's what they mean, the good people, the good star. And I was thinking, well, they're Gaelic words, but they've sort of bastardized the grammar. And sometimes when you're talking about places, sometimes when you're talking about proper nouns, sometimes the adjectives comes first in Gaelic. So if you said Allan Gadav, a rough island, it'd be like island rough. But if you said Gadav Allan, rough island, meaning the name of a place, then the adjective would come first, and maybe that's what they've done, but it feels a little bit strange. But anyway, so Maringa for good star, MaJeena for good people. Yes, they are the Orions, P52 Orions, humans from 52,000 years in our future. Very complicated, they're going back in time, rah, rah, rah. And there it is. So I think maybe I'll leave that recording here for now. That's almost, yep, we're hitting 30 minutes. That seems like a good time to stop. And this is the first of many recordings. There's a lot to report. I've got a huge amount of information about these dudes. I like them. They're my friends. They're my family. I have memories of galloping about on all fours with their kids when I was a little kid, and I thought that was just dreams and stuff, but apparently it's not. Branu, one of them, said she's known me since I was born. She's about 300 years old. And the three main individuals I have contact with, Branu and Joseph, her son. He calls himself Joseph or Joe. He's about 80 years old, and a daughter called Butterfly, I think she's about 50. But they all look young. They all look like they're in their 20s or something. Orions don't age in that sense. They just have growth spurts. They grow slowly. So if, like, Butterfly, for instance, is about 50 years old, but she's probably no more than 5 foot. Maybe she's, something like that, maybe slightly less. Joseph, I'm not quite sure how tall he is, actually. Branu is 6 foot or more. She's 300 years old. If you come across fair beings that have white skin, huge blue eyes, but they're not that tall, they are still Orions. They're tall whites, but younger. If they're, let's say, 5.5 foot tall, they're probably I don't know, like 70 years old or something like that, probably still. I'm not quite sure, but they age slowly like that. They reach about 6 foot tall when they're about 100. Over the next couple 100 years, they pause for a bit and they have another growth spurt, and then after another couple 100 years, they have another growth spurt. They have growth spurts as a side effect of tampering with their own longevity tens of thousands of years ago, where they lengthened their lifespans, but they didn't foresee that this would have an effect on the human genome, where there'd be these spontaneous side effects, where there'd be growth spurts, unforeseen growth spurts at different ages over the centuries, and they never figured that out. And they've tried different things. They've tried to alter their genome in other ways as well. They've decided that every time they fuck with it, every time they go into it, it just creates more side effects. They can never perfect it. You can't. You press a button here, and who knows what's going to happen in this holistic, systemic system that's us. So they've come back to the source, and that's what the J-rods or the Greys did as well. The P52 J-rods, which are like sort of like Greys, but they're in popular culture, but they're dark. They're sort of like a chocolatey brown. They're shorter than probably people would normally consider J-rods. They're wrinkly. I think of them as being the wrinklies. I saw some when I was younger. I haven't seen them since I was very, very young, and I thought they were dreams at the time. Now the only beings I have contact with are Orions themselves. The Orions can take on lots of different appearances. I've seen them in their dark suits that I call beetle suits. I call them beetle suits because there was a version of the Blue Beetle just recently that kind of looked like them. Dark, huge red eyes, like some kind of technology on their chests. I'm not quite sure what that is that they wear as well with it. Nowadays, I think there's other incarnations of Blue Beetle character, new drawings and designs that don't look like it anymore. But at one stage there, the Blue Beetle looked a lot like these suits that the Orions wear that are dark. So the tall whites I'm talking about, they're dark, they're grey to black with huge dark eyes that start glowing red sometimes at night in particular. The first beetle suit I ever saw, I was 4 years old. I have a strong, clear memory. It was my first supernatural experience of when my family went down to the local golf course where there were a lot of pine trees, like North American pines, growing along the edge of and that's where we used to get our Christmas trees from. And this is in summer in Australia. Christmas is in summer, of course, in the southern hemisphere. And it's pretty warm there during the day. And my mum was there. I don't remember my dad being there. So my mum and my other siblings. So I have 4 older siblings and a younger sibling. My mum had a little brother 3 years younger than me. So he would have been just 1 year old at the time. They went into the trees and they were going to saw a bough off one of the pine trees in the golf course, just off the road. And I noticed that there was something looking out from behind the pine tree. And this has just haunted me all my life. This triangular shaped head with huge black eyes. And what I always thought of as being like a mask. It looked like I always thought it was a mask. I never thought it was actually the being itself. But and with skinny hands and arms coming out from the side of the pine tree, it was looking at me. It was probably about it was like 50 feet away, 60 feet away, or something like that. And then it went back in behind the pine tree, and it came back out the other side. And I was looking at this thing, and I was saying to my mum, "Can you see this shit? What's going on here? What's this thing here?" And she's like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" Couldn't see it. So I was hanging out behind this pine tree, and my siblings came back again, walked past the pine tree. So from behind, walking past it, so they should have been able to see it on the other side of the big pine. And they just walked past it and came over, and they were a little bit agitated because my sister had knocked her eye on a stick. She was bleeding from the edge of her eye. And this is how I know what age I was at the time it happened, because I said to my sister, and she's 6 years older than me, "Do you remember that summer when we were getting pine trees when you poked your eye with a stick?" And she's like, yeah, I remember that bloody well. I was saying, "How old are you?" She was saying 6. So I was like, okay, I must have been 4. And so she was bleeding from her eye, and that was all drama about that. And I was like, yeah, but the thing over here, what the fuck's going on with this? And everyone's just ignoring me. And for years, I'd talked to everyone about it, saying, this thing behind the tree, I was watching it, what the fuck was that? And I've been interested in the paranormal world, and I thought of it as being like a tree spirit at the time. And its skin was like, I remember thinking it was like a continuation of the pine tree. So it was like the color of the pine tree. And then it had these huge eyes and this triangular sort of shape to its head. And anyway, so nowadays I know that's beetle suit, and I've seen them since. It's a tall white in their stealth, the military wear that they wear away from their underground habitations, and that can turn invisible, so it cloaks them. They can levitate, and then a dark cloud comes up, like a shimmer that blurs them off, and sort of smokes up around them, and then they float, which is where the Mothman ideas come from. That's where the Orions are Mothman as well in these suits. They can pass through solid objects in these suits as well. And when they're invisible, they often still cast shadows. So they've given rise to the ideas of shadow people and things like that people see after they've had UFO events, interactions sometimes. Chris Bledsoe, for example, I don't know if people are familiar with Christopher Bledsoe's case, Orions. No doubt about it. they're definitely Orions. I've talked to the guy. He's the loveliest guy, and he's very open-minded, and he's not quite sure what they are. But and he listens to my theories and what I have to say politely and that kind of thing. But they are the Orions, the tall whites that he's in contact with as well. And he had missing time there in his 2007 encounter, and when he was under hypnosis, he recalled seeing the 7-foot tall being with huge blue eyes out of these suits without the hood and everything, with the and the little kids as well were interacting with them and galloping after their truck and all this kind of stuff, which is typical Orion behavior. They gallop around on all fours, particularly the children, sometimes the adults as well. They move around more easily than we do on all fours. Yes, so there it is. So whoa, we've got 40 minutes now. Whoa, we're just kicking along. Okay, I'll call it off there, and I'll be doing some more recordings, because I'd very much like this information to get out into the world. I think in ufology nowadays, people don't really know what the fuck's going on, actually, and it wanders off, and it's got its own folklore, and it goes down silly paths. There's only actually one major ET race that is in contact with us at the moment, and that is the Orions, or the tall whites. And they are also responsible for the largest portion of supernatural occurrences in general in the world today, whether it be ghosts, thinking that you've got ghosts in your house, especially poltergeist type stuff, because they move shit around, they've got a sense of humor, they'll fuck with you, they'll put your skillet in the freezer, and they'll put your bowl of muesli in the microwave while you're not looking, and things like that. They at one time they moved my towels on me when at night I went outside, and there were towels on the line, and I went into the shed, and we had a freezer in the shed that we were keeping stuff in, and I opened the pedestrian door in the shed and went to switch on the light and went in there, and just in the amount of time it took me to get stuff out of the fridge and come back again, they laid a towel across the door of the shed, just nicely, a white towel, so I had to step over it to get back out again. And I was thinking, I gotta wash that shit again, dudes. But anyway, yeah, practical jokes. Stealing stuff, putting it back again. They don't keep stuff unless you give them permission to. They'll return it. But yeah, just like the fairies of old. I mean, they were the Gaelic they used to do the same kind of stuff. But I'll call it off here, guys, and I'll be back again soon. So, and that is a threat. So, I'll catch you later. Signing out. Riain O Muscrai. Sonia Kagamach. Euch